As Rav Meir was moving more and more into education, leaving his political involvement, you can imagine that there were those that questioned that. They said, you're doing so much in the SEM and politics and Aguda. How in the world could you focus so much on education and leave what you're doing? So was his response. How can you leave us? He says, you're doing revolutionary work. You're overturning worlds. So you reply, if I single-handed am overturning worlds, let me have my way. In a few years, I'll raise up for you 200 Talmidim. We'll turn over the whole world. Right? That was the idea. He saw that the future was not just in his efforts, but he can make a yeshiva which would make tremendous people who would affect the whole Polish Jewry and perhaps beyond. Now, you might be wondering, or Mayor, so he's looking for one yeshiva, such a big visionary, such a big idealist and activist. So that, of course, that wasn't it. He wanted to make a whole network of yeshivas across the land. This is the plan, as it was mentioned in 1926, to find yeshiva katanas in every town and small city, and in every major city, a regional yeshiva, and for the entire country, yeshiva gvoa. Lemberg and Brisk and Lemberg, Krakow, and guess what? It didn't stop in Poland. That was the plan, a network. And then the greatest yeshiva of all was going to be, guess where? In Yerushalayim. That was the plan. The most gifted Talmidim, the greatest of the young scholars, will complete their education. The end product is going to be in Eretz Yisrael. And Rav Meir had a view, Chacham Roas and Olad, wise man sees the end. And Rav Meir saw this. He saw that even in the 20s, of course, the inklings of the trickles and the yeshiva was getting established, and he saw that this is where the future Kimitzion Teitzei Torah was going to be. There's a beautiful lashon in the Chazon Ish. I think we might have mentioned it before here. Asar Golias Nisgalta Torah. 10 Golias the Torah was Nisgala. The Achshav Torah Chozeres Lachsani Shelo. Now Torah is going back to its place, said the Chazon Ish. Torah is going back to Eretz Yisrael. So Meir saw that also. The Holy Land was developing slowly but surely as a center of Jewish life. And it was going to have a lot of different shilas, etc. And he wanted that his people would be involved in dealing with that, etc. Now, let's talk about, so that was a little bit of his vision and his plan. How did it unfold? It's nice to be a visionary. So it starts in 1923. He already started campaigning, and he was campaigning, by the way, then for the SEM, and he was riding a carriage with someone named Reb Shmuel Eichenbaum, who's a very, very wealthy person in Lublin, and they're traveling in a carriage, or whatever, a car, I don't know, and they saw a tract of land. And Reb Eichenbaum said, I don't know what to do with that tract of land. It's not a smart thing to say to someone like Rav Meir Shapiro. Rav Meir Shapiro says, I know what we're going to do with that tract of land. It's reminiscent one time, the Nosson Tzvi Finkel, the modern day Nosson Tzvi Finkel, the Reshiva of the Mir, was davening, and his brother, I believe, Reb Gedalia, on Rosh Hashanah, asked him afterwards, Nosson Tzvi, what were you davening for? What was your tefillah? What was going on? He says, I was looking out the window and I was saying, we're going to build a building over there. I think that's today what's Beis Yeshaya, a massive building holding hundreds of Talmidim, Ken Yirbu. So, same type of thing. What are we going to do? I know what we're going to do over there. I have a great holy purpose for that tract of land. And the Hanachat Even Apina was in 1924, a year later than that, and 50,000 people showed up for that. The Chorka Rebbe was there, the Slonim Rebbe was there, and the Novominsker Rebbe was there. What was the Bund's reaction? I love this. The Bund, of course, were the secular socialists, and they said it's the resurrection of the Shtreimel, right? They didn't look with an Ayin Tova. Everything they were working with to bring old-time Judaism down was now getting picked up by this upstart. And there were tremendous obstacles. The Polish government itself stopped the yeshiva 3 different times, and but mostly, of course, the main difficulty you can imagine was in fundraising. Rav Meir's original plan was that Polish Jewry was going to help him out, and they would be the supporters of the things. It happened to be the Zloty, the Polish currency dropped recently around that time. We'll talk later about he didn't feel that Polish Jewry at the end of the day got behind him. And then he went on his massive fundraising trip. Now think of the most active fundraiser you know today, right? How much is he away from his family, away from his home? Now let's think about Rav Meir Shapiro. So he went to Berlin, and this is really a nice note that even though German Jewry wasn't so into the concept of yeshivas, as Rav Dessler writes in the letter, their point was more community, and Lithuanian world was more into yeshivas, of course. And I'll just let the cat out of the bag for those who aren't going to see Rav Dessler's letter, but it is something to see. But he basically says that the German Jewry, at least certainly parts of it, did a better job at keeping people from, but they didn't make that many Gedolei Torah. And the Lithuanian Jewry made many, many more Gedolei Torah, but they didn't do as good a job keeping everybody from, which is really interesting. But anyway, so even though the Germans weren't so into Limud Torah in that way, in yeshivas, etc., of course, they learned, obviously, but he said that he felt that they really helped him out a lot, which I always like that note. And he went then to Vienna, Czechoslovakia, France, Amsterdam, London, Strasbourg. Amazing. And then he made it to the U.S. Now, the U.S. alone, how long was he there? 13 months. 13 months away from Poland. Could you imagine? That's how I told you to imagine. The greatest fundraiser you had. 13 months in America. He spoke 242 times. How do you remember? They said, Baram Zohar, is the Gemara in Baba Basra. Baram Zohar Osu Yishla Tov is Yeshua ben Gamliel Shmo. The answer is the one who started the whole Cheder system. And they used to make a drasha. Baram is in Gematria 242. Beis, Reish is 200. Mem 242. Baram Zohar is Osu Yishla Tov. And Rav Meir himself said, this is beautiful, that this was one of the glorious parsha, the biggest supporters he had were the Americans, right? He said this is Chachmei Lublin in preparation's greatest hour was from the American Jews, right? And we'll just end with a nice anecdote. We'll give some more anecdotes next time about how his fundraising went, but he one time was speaking in Yiddish, of course, he spoke in Yiddish, and he brought a nice American boy over, and he said, Ingrid, did you understand what I said? He said, I don't understand exactly, but I think you were asking for money. He said, if you understood that, you understood better than everybody else.